Excellent. So Robert is with us today. He is the managing partner of Benson Oak, and he's based in Tel Aviv, but he's actually in New York right now. He's got a couple of tickets to watch the Philadelphia play tomorrow, and so that's why he is. So he's flown all the way from Tel Aviv to New York in order to make this call. So we've got more people coming in. We have excellent. Okay. So Robert, I think we'll get started if we may.
Great.
So I'd love to just introduce you quickly. Here we're talking about Web3 today, and we're talking about whether or not it's a whole load of bull or whether it's inevitable. I know what your answer is going to be, but we'll press on with that. You are an early stage, or Benson Oak has been an early stage venture capital fund focused on tech businesses. And today you are all in on investing in Web3. You know, it's the Web3 founders creating the digital assets of the platforms. That's what you're really interested in, the picks and shovels of the gold rush, if you like. And I remember back in 2018, maybe even 2017, you came and we were introduced, and you came and spoke to Forum at a London breakfast, and I found it absolutely fascinating. You talked about blockchain and crypto. It was really the first time I'd ever really sort of focused on that. And I learned a lot from it. I remember in particular a phrase that you used, which I took home with me, and I understood, you know, that blockchain was a ledger, an indisputable record of ownership. And ever since then, whenever I've thought about blockchain or crypto, I've always come back to that and understood that it's an indisputable record of ownership. And from that comes everything else. So, but I think we all need to be reminded about Web3. You know, we hear about it constantly, but then in the same breath, we hear about, you know, the crash of technology stock at the moment, particularly Zuckerberg, obviously taking a very heavy fall, based on his bet on the meta and the future of tech. And so, you know, we need to know, those of us who don't wake up every morning thinking about it, we need to know, you know, what is Web3? Where is it at? How soon are we going to be consumed by it? And how soon are we going to enjoy the fact that it's around us? So the way this talk is going to go, to those of you who are in on the call, Robert's going to talk for 10 minutes or so on Web3, and then he will take questions. So please fire in your questions in the side box, and we'll go from there. But for the moment, we're all on mute now, Robert. And if you could take us away, look forward to hearing what you've got to say in the next 10 minutes or so. Great,
thanks. It was the first time we met at that event in London, actually. So, and the takeaway that you just said is exactly the takeaway. In fact, when I do a presentation, it's the very first slide that I talk about. You know, blockchain is effectively a public ledger that affirms ownership. And all you have to do is remember that, and everything flows. So first of all, there is a lot of BS. Let's just be clear. I do believe in the inevitability of Web3, but there's a lot of BS. Just like back in the internet days, there was a lot of BS, and that with hindsight became inevitable. So, you know, just for, you know, very quick background, because I think it sets the context. I am a huge believer in Web3, but not necessarily as its own quote investment category, because that's actually what brings a lot of the BS, a lot of the speculation, a lot of chasing things, which has been going on for 300 years. It's nothing new. So specifically, what I look at is Web3 or Web3 enabled businesses. And it's just like in the early 2000s, there were these things called internet funds that invested in this thing called the internet. Nobody calls it anymore. I actually think of them as the internet didn't necessarily create any of these businesses. Entrepreneurs created businesses, and the internet and its ability to get mass distribution, to be able to disrupt business models, to be able to create basically anything for a global scale is what enabled these businesses. And again, using that word enabled these businesses and small businesses to disrupt big businesses and grow. And I think that's what will happen with Web3. So I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of the historical evolution of this inevitability, and there's a lot of differences. And the biggest difference, which has led to some of the BS, is at the end of the day, you need money. Web3, crypto, is literally a currency. Let's put aside the word money. It's currency. And you need a currency because at the end of the day, what you're really doing is removing middlemen, right? So when we want to transact with each other in a typical, in an offline world, and even in a Web2 world, you need somebody to validate that I paid or I exchanged goods. And that middleman has been essential throughout history. And that middleman, whether it's a bank, whether it's an art dealer, whether, just you name it, whether it's Facebook, whether it's someone else, they take a cut for being in the middle. And the reality is that in the beginning, we forget about this, but in the internet, there was no money in the beginning. You could not, the banks, financial institutions did not allow you to put your credit card. You could not buy things. It was specifically outlawed, actually. It took a lot of years before e-commerce or anything became a thing. And not to get into too much of the historical, philosophy of all that, but that's really what has created, and in some ways, if I can use the word, bastardized the internet, that became an advertising model. Because at the end of the day, if you're on the internet, how do you make money in the early days? And it was basically based on attention. My eyeballs were the currency, and ads were the way to basically feed the middleman. So Web3 changes all that, because by removing the middleman, you create a currency. By having that currency and this, again, public ledger of trust for all these different types of services, platforms, economies, that public indisputable record alleviates the need for a middleman to say, yes, you used to own it and now he owns it, or she used to have that and she paid that. That's the beauty of it, and that's where you need the currency. So of course, when there's currency and when there's quote money involved, there's speculation. And that needs to get out of the system. And I think we should have had a recording of that forum event in 2018, because I think I've been pretty consistent in saying there's different buckets. And I think I actually said it then. There are different buckets of what a cryptocurrency is. And one will be like gold, which is basically what Bitcoin is, right? Where it's a value of asset, it's going to go up. It's purely based on the financial value. Most other things, from Ethereum to the wide range of different types of, whether they're NFTs, whether the tokens, they're all basically different words, different acronyms, different language for effectively the same thing. A decentralized, trustful thing, I'm going to call it a thing, in this case happens to be a token or currency, that affirms ownership. And that becomes, by definition, that should not have its own value. That actually should be stable in some ways. And so that's sort of the give and the take. And I think in terms of the inevitability of Web3, this idea that we can control our own assets, we can control our own data, we can own our assets, we can trade with it, we can have this public record that leads to different kinds of royalties, it can lead to allocation of ownership much better. This is what leads to the inevitability. But in internet years, we're still in, I would say 1998, 1999. The internet and all that we talk about the internet didn't really take off until you had the infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, that's mostly the bandwidth capabilities that really weren't until 3G and even more 4G. Didn't really have it until you had mobile, where it was all literally in our hands. You didn't have full distribution until you had the app stores, where you had Apple and Google, and any developer could build on those platforms and distribute them to millions. Now there's a price to pay for that. That price is 30%. There's actually a number on it. So if you are a developer and you want to build on mobile, you have to do on probably both of those, at the very least one. Or if you want to build on Facebook, if you want to build on other platforms, there's someone in that middle who's enabling distribution. And we don't have that yet for Web3 enabled businesses. So again, the apps the number of apps that are relative to where we were in internet days is, again, early days, like early app store days, which is like 2006, 2007. And then the other aspect is we have these things in the internet called, they communicate with each other. Otherwise you have these walled gardens. I'm over here, I'm over there, I can't really communicate. Now we have things called APIs. You can plug into this. I can of course plug into Facebook. I can plug into other places, but those APIs are controlled by, again, these walled gardens that can turn them off if they want to, that can charge for access if they want to. And again, breeds this control, really, when you think about it, the Web 2, as you call it, is controlled by 5 companies in many ways, because they control the data. By definition, blockchain is one big API. By definition, everything is open, everything is public, everything can be seen, everything can be tracked. And again, you have this public ownership. And increasingly, and now people can build on top of these blockchains and intersect and cross-communicate with other ones. And so by definition, the blockchain will open everything up by default, which again opens up layers of communication, lack of reliance on big players, and lack of and the ability to really communicate both with your users and other partners. And then I think the other aspect that for me as an investor, so why am I, when I say I'm all in on Web3, it's all, my background is investing in B2C, and what I call B to SMB. So great UI, great UX product that enables anybody to consume products, to deliver, to develop them on a mass scale. And that's our sweet spot. That's what I've been investing in for 20 years. The Web3 and everything I just talked about will basically open that up. So you'll have a new breed of B2C companies, a new breed of companies that are targeting solo entrepreneurs, people who can make their own money. Web3 will enable that, whether it's a token is involved, whether not a token, at some point, there'll be some element of the blockchain, this public record of ownership, that will basically drive all that. And as the infrastructure grows, as the scalability gets, as transactions get faster, as people get more trusting of the platforms, because at the end of the day, when you read about the ups and the downs, people are like, I don't want to touch it. And again, the key difference with the internet is it's money, and people get nervous. Like, okay, there's money involved, and I want to be careful. So I think as soon as this moves into utility, where all of us are using, just like we don't need to know how Ruby on Rails works to know how a mobile, this app thing that I have on my phone, I'm ordering Uber. I don't need to know how it works. It just works. That's going to happen with Web3 blockchain type apps where people have no idea, even that they're using a token. They might not even need to know that. It just works and it becomes seamless. And once that tipping point takes off, and I don't know if that tipping point is next year, 2 years, or 3 years, to be honest. So I'm very much investing in these picks and shovels that are going to help make that happen. But I think the inevitability of that is because this is just what people want, right? So for me, it's just obvious that humans want this kind of control. Second, as an investor seeing lots of deals, really is true that the best and brightest, if I can say that, not exclusively so, I don't want to say anything negative about anyone, but are really getting into these new types of Web3 applications, and they're the ones they're going to build. It's going to be the innovative thinking, the building software, the building. At the end of the day, blockchain is a figment of our imagination, just like actually most things are, and then that's the beauty of it. And so the entrepreneurs of the future are really now building for that, and that's what's the most exciting. You see these entrepreneurs are thinking differently. They're thinking about how to scale. They're thinking long term, and especially in the current environment, where you could almost say it's crazier than usual to actually start a startup with venture capitalists thinking the world's going to nothing, we go to zero, et cetera. So people are still, I don't care, I'm going to create a business. It's super exciting. It also enables them. I think one of the most exciting things about Web3 is this idea of diversified ownership by using tokens and NFTs and other things that can actually provide ownership to my user base. It makes you much less reliant on just raising a lot of money. You can actually have the crowd. This is an oft repeated phrase, but it's actually true in this case. You can have the crowd promote you, and you can incentivize the crowd. You can give them ownership. You can give them royalties. You can give them lots of things. And your 100 fans or your 1,000 fans can actually promote you, so that you keep adding zeros to the number of fans, because you have this army of incentivized co-owners who are actually promoting your product, your app, your platform, whatever it may be. And so that's the most exciting thing, I think, in terms of the inevitability of Web3. And I would just say the last thing is actually brands. So there's been, brands can sometimes be beat up brands. They do this, they do that, they're the middleman. But really, I actually think the big brands are the ones who are going to lead, who are now actually leading us into this future, because they're the ones who are going to, at the end of the day, we trust brands, whether we like them or not, we trust them. And they are increasingly seeing the power of Web3 for loyalty points, to better do loyalty, to better do subscriptions, to better do promotions. So you're seeing just in the last 6 weeks, wave of announcements from the likes of Starbucks, from Nike, from, you name it, especially around fashion, around retail, who are using this public record of ownership and these many different things that you can use with NFTs and with tokens to incentivize their trusted fans, their trusted users, to use them, to promote them. And I think that's what's going to make it, slowly but surely, that's what's going to turn this into like the next billion users, because you'll have people that are just doing their general commerce. They're buying shoes, they're buying fashion, they're buying this, and they're going to start almost seamlessly using NFTs in that everyday life that they're used to. And that will usher in this era, along with the startups that are building from the ground up. And so it's very easy to, hand wave, oh, it happened with the internet, there was a crash, it's going to happen with crypto. So it's easy to say that. I think the reality is that there's many common traits that are similar there, as I look at it. There's many things that are different, but in the end, it's just inevitable. No, it's all these different aspects are just, are clearly going to make it happen. And I think it's just, as I said, it's just a question of the timing. The timing is uncertain because a lot of the BS needs to get itself out of the system. So the current crash, as you called it, is, in my opinion, a good thing. You need this kind of thing. Get rid of the root of the bag, get rid of the nonsense, and focus on the good stuff that everybody understands and can trust.
Thank you. That's great. Terrific. I've got two questions. I want the second one I'm going to come to, but that's around the walled gardens that you were talking about. I'd like further explanation on that, please. But I do just want to test you a little bit more on, or push you a little bit more on the timing, because we've been hearing about Web3 for a long time. So you talked about tipping point a couple of times, and you're not sure when it's going to come. First of all, why are you not sure when it's going to come? And secondly, what's your best approximate on that? When do we as human beings become really comfortable and have assumed Web3 as part of our daily life in the way that the internet took hold of us all?
Yeah. When do you think the internet became that way, actually? Was it with the mobile phone?
I guess it probably was. That was certainly a big accelerator, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the first iPhone was 2000.
So that brings me also on
2008, I think. Right?
Because you also talking about the rapidity of new apps as well. So can I bring that into this question? So when does that start happening?
Yeah. So if you think of the internet, let's put it in an internet time frame. My first interaction with the internet was 1995. Of course, it was a technology that was around for a long, long time. But the first email, the first dial-up modems was 1995. Really, it wasn't mass market, billions of users until the mobile phones. And even then, if you remember, there wasn't an app store in the first iPhone. So really like 2010, 2011, this type of time is when it's a long time, right? It's almost 2 decades.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah.
And so I think so the Bitcoin white paper was like, 14 years ago. People do, I don't know how many people here are using, have ever interacted. I'm guessing you have actually without realizing in some cases, but have interacted with anything related to Web3. It's much more prevalent than people do realize. There are a lot of people who are using it on a regular basis. By the way, even more so now.
So when you talk about when we book an Uber, for example, effectively, this is Web3 in action.
When you book an Uber, there's no Web3 yet.
Okay.
I don't think so, actually.
Okay. So that Uber example was just give that to me again. The Uber example was what?
Oh, I didn't mean to give it. Did I say Uber? I didn't mean to say Uber.
You did. Okay.
Or maybe
that made me think. That okay, well, we're using Web3. We don't even know about it yet. So, but
yeah, exactly. But there are a lot of people that are using it for financial transactions, especially with, by the way, the war in Russia and Ukraine. I know people that have just become bankless and have to use crypto and stuff. So there's a lot of people that are trading in it. Of course, that was been the main use case. People are buying digital art. People are doing it, but again, it's mostly, let's be honest, for speculative reasons. When will it become, mass market? So I think it's within 2 years. You're going to start seeing it's going to be a daily. Again, don't hold me to the number, et cetera. But and that's much faster than in internet times. It's going to become a seamless part of our life. And again, my main thought about how this becomes faster is the brands. There's first of all been a ton of money. At the end of the day, again, I keep using the internet analogy, but the internet wouldn't have worked unless people literally went to the bottom of the ocean and were building the pipes that enabled the speeds that we now take for granted, the global crossings, et cetera. So these things have been built with billions of dollars. And these are basically blockchain protocols that have gotten more mature, that have more developers who are incentivized to work on them, that continue to work on it. For example, Ethereum just went through this big thing called a merge, which moved it from proof of work to proof of stake, which is just environmentally better, faster. That took 2 years, I think, to do it actually. And it wasn't done by any central hand. It's done by literally a decentralized community that built that. So there's a lot of money that's been pouring in on the infrastructure side. What you're going to need is easy to use wallets, which we have one. Shameless shout out. Zengo is our crypto wallet that we've invested in. Makes it super easy to use. You're onboarded in like 30 seconds. You need great UI. You need great UX. You need product, just like the internet. You need products that work. Mm-hmm. And most of all, I think the impetus will be these brands that are promoting it, which becomes ironically trusted. And not only trusted, but then part of your lives in other aspects. That's the trigger, I think, that will start to take this off as more and more brands do. They start to do loyalty points on chain, all these other things on blockchain. So I think it's you never know the tipping point. So you look backwards and say, it was 4G on mobile that made it happen, right? You live in the moment. So I do think in 2 years, you'll reach that point where it's much more than it is today, but it's already a much bigger number today than people realize.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look, I'm seeing some questions coming in. So if I may, Melissa, are you there? Can we bring you in? Yeah, terrific. Could you ask your question of Robert, please?
Yes. Which countries are at the forefront of Web3? So from an execution perspective, but also, but I suppose it's the same thing from an investment perspective, where should we be looking and who's really moving in this space? Because I know at the beginning, Simon said you just come from Israel, and we do a lot with Israel in the medical cannabis space, and it's such an incredibly vibrant community there. I wondered if you thought they were at the front of things.
Yeah, from a startup point of view, it's really kind of, on the one hand, it's similar to traditional markets, Silicon Valley, Israel, etc. I do think, it's much more geographically diversified. Like there's a little startup hub, a little Web3 hub in Colombia. I've had numerous calls with founders in the country of Colombia. Lisbon in Europe is a big place, actually, where these sort of hubs have gathered. And then Asia is big. And the reason Asia is big is because there it's more ground up, right? There, Korea, even China, if you're on WeChat or these other things, you don't use cash in these places. I think the percentage of cash that's utilized is much, much less. And that's really, something like WeChat, where you literally do everything within this super app, is really in some ways a precursor. Obviously it's not decentralized, but it's a precursor for everything that crypto is. You're focused on the super app, you're doing everything there. You don't have to do cash. Everything gets kind of done peer to peer. So I think from that point of view, I do think Asian markets are much more open to this. And then the last thing I'm seeing is a lot in Africa. And just to give an example of something, it's not, people, when they think Web3, they think tokens, they think Bitcoin, they think this. We have an investment in a company that's based in Abu Dhabi. Their main revenue comes from Africa. And what they're doing is they're digitizing the supply chain for big brands. So if you're a big beer company or a big beverage, or you're even a government ministry, a health ministry, you basically want to know where things are going, right? Like if you're a beer company, you produce something for Germany, you're not supposed to sell it in France. So how do you monitor that? You have supply chain, you have this. With actual blockchain, you can actually know exactly where it is with tags and everything. Plus, these big beverage companies not only want to digitize their supply chain, they also want to engage with their customers. So they can use that exact same system that digitizes their supply chain to know where things are, to actually engage directly with their users. And so the big brands are engaging with this. But the reason I mentioned Africa is, similar, not a lot of fixed telephones in Africa, because they had the benefit, I guess, of skipping the generation with mobiles. They didn't have to build the big telephone poles because we had this mobile. I think that'll happen with Web3 there. There's not a lot of trust in actual currencies there. And so there's an amazing amount of traction that I've seen of some sort of Web3 startups, and a lot of deal flow coming from Africa. So I think the short answer is it's going to resemble traditional startup markets, but it's going to be just way more diversified geographically because people can do it from anywhere.
Terrific. Thank you, Melissa. And I'm bringing in my business partner, Forum for Impact, Michael Meehan in Vancouver. Michael,
beautiful city.
Come through with your question and your observation, please.
Yeah. So as far as Web 3.0, as far as I understand it, is that the whole notion around blockchain and the democratization of data, and especially large assets. So I work in the ESG finance space, where a lot of the assets are large, right? They're for institutionals, for banks and sovereign funds and pension funds and so on. But one of the more exciting things I think about blockchain is that you can start to tokenize these things, and everyday people can then participate in areas of finance that they could not before, especially around impact, carbon, things like that. However, I was on the phone this morning even with Translucia out of Asia. It's a metaverse sort of platform kind of thing, and I mean they're looking at tokenizing things like carbon assets and things like that as a way to be honest with you. I think it opens up the possibility of getting away with transporter tax, right, as a tax evasion scheme. A couple of weeks ago, I was in New York at Climate Week at a crypto event for climate, and to be honest, I felt like I had to have a shower when I walked out of there. So it seems like we're in this kind of Web 2.5 transitional, where there's a lot of great ideas, and the possibility of, especially around blockchain, is so immense. But it seems like there's just a lot of bad actors swimming around in the market, where from the institutional side, it's hard to make a bet on Web3 because it seems like we don't have the right guardrails up. Is that an accurate assessment that the guardrails aren't quite there yet? And
Mhm.
how do you see that sort of coming together so the institutional investment world can have a little bit more confidence or at least more visibility into what's possible?
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. Look, to be philosophical, we humans are kind of simple, right? We when there's opportunities, people take advantage of them, right? So when there's not regulation, people take advantage. Like it's just, human arbitrage, it's called. So for sure, you need. I'm actually a proponent of regulation. I think in some ways people need to be protected from themselves, but most of all protected from bad actors. So I do think, in the blog that I wrote, where I lay out some of this and that the inevitability of Web3, the last point I make is the tokenization of everything, which is where it ends. But it's the last point because it's going to take a time. And we've seen a number of things. We're going to tokenize real estate. We're going to tokenize this, which makes sense, right? If, from every point of view, right? If you want to sell your house, right? Maybe I can sell a fraction of my house rather than sell my house and move out, right? I can actually, or even, even as a startup investor, right? Usually, unless you go public, you have to wait for the right time, the right place, someone who wants to buy your company, and then you have one exit. Yeah. But if everything is denominated in tokens and you've actually fractionalized it and everything is public, I can sell 5%, I can sell 10%, I can sell 20%. So I think that promise is going to be there, but it has to be with trust. And that's at the end of the day, big things that you're going to put there, people don't trust it enough, right? Nor should they, probably. I'm not going to suddenly put $100 million asset on some blockchain and fractionalize it if I don't know that it can't be stolen or security. Because even though we don't like paying middlemen, we still like middlemen, right? We all hate the customer support that's like voice operated. It doesn't, let me just speak to someone, right? So we still do want that middleman now and then. So I think it's a function of trust in the system, regulation. But again, it's that tipping point. Once it takes off, it'll just take off. It'll just become, there's so much cost savings. That'll be the tokenization where you don't have to have someone who literally charges you a fee for me handing it to you, right? Which is at the end of the day, all of these assets, big or small, is what they have to pay. So of course it's going to happen, but me saying it is not going to make it. It's not just, of course it's going to happen, but of course it's only going to happen when it's fully trusted, not partially trusted, not, we'll see if it works. For anything like that, there has to be like full trust that the system works. And so I think tokenization of quote everything is inevitable, but that'll take the longest. And there'll be crap that happens along the way, unfortunately.
So thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for that. And do we have any further questions? Anybody want to put up their hand? Otherwise, I'm going to thank Robert very much indeed for that. That was really concise, interesting. There is a recording that will go up on Forum TV on the YouTube channel, and we'll send you the link to that. And I see no further questions coming in. So Robert, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you at London Forum in a couple of weeks' time, and many of you are coming over. So we look forward to that as well. And thank you so much indeed. Enjoy the Philadelphia game tomorrow.
Thank you. Me as well. And thanks everyone for taking some time to join. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.